If you're looking on to your next side, the actual purchase of Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase, Robert Livingston and James Monroe will travel to France. They'll meet with Charles Talleyrand. He had been the prime minister before Napoleon seized power and took control of France. Kudos to Talleyrand. He didn't lose his head because most people in France, if you're at the top and you're no longer at the top, it's because you got topped, guillotined. So, he was obviously quite the diplomat to be able to step down from prime minister status down to just ambassador status and keep his head. That was pretty impressive there. He will, at this point in time, have the joy of informing the American ambassadors and James Monroe, the Secretary of State, that, you can buy New Orleans, but how would you feel about $5 million more? You can have all of Louisiana. And of course, it was such a great deal. When you really think about it, you're talking, some say it was like 3 cents an acre, others it was like 1 cent an acre. The bottom line is it is an incredible deal on all that land. And of course, America is growing at this point in time and needs, is going to need more land, especially as more people evacuate from Europe, to get out of the way of all the wars and everything. So he's definitely going to take on that idea. And of course, Jefferson is going to decide that his presidential powers in the Constitution that refer to treaty making give the president the power to make this treaty and this purchase. Now, that is a very loose interpretation of the Constitution and is completely out of characteristic for Thomas Jefferson, who had campaigned on small government, downsizing the U.S. government, get rid of American debt, putting the power back in the hands of the states, strict interpretation of the Constitution. If it's not in the Constitution, you can't do it. And he literally throws all of his ideas out the window. He's not acting like a Republican president. He's acting like a Federalist president. This is something you would expect John Adams to do, or Pinckney to do, or one of those guys, not Thomas Jefferson, the great agrarian, small, government, power in the hands of the states, closed door policy type guy that he had campaigned on. So the fact that he does this is amazing. And rather shocking. Of course, Congress being the way Congress is, even then as today, no matter what the president does, his detractors, those are the people on the other side of the political fence, are going to find some fault with this. So he's going to get a lot of backlash from the Federalist Party. I'm not exactly sure why they were so backlashing on him, because he was acting like a Federalist president. But there you go. He's not a Federalist, and despite the fact he's acting like a Federalist, they're going to make an issue of it. They're going to claim that he's spent money that he doesn't have. He's exceeded his powers of authority. In today's day and age, this would have been blowed up on Twitter and everything else in the world. Needless to say, Jefferson's a little bit of a trouble with this. They're even snickering about the ideas of impeachment and things like that. But of course, none of it happens because there's no power in the Federalist Party really to do any of that. But a lot of Americans were not really happy with this because he literally overnight doubled the size of the country, doubled the size of the government, and doubled our debt in one fell swoop, which was definitely not what Republicans said they wanted. So to justify this, he's got to look at exploring all this land. What did we buy? He's got to prove to Congress and America that this was a good deal, despite what he had done, that this was what was right for America. To do this, he's going to convince Congress to fund an expedition. In 1804, he is going to get Captain Meriwether Lewis, a member of Jefferson's staff. He had fought in the American Revolution. He had distinguished himself as a can-do kind of guy. He was a educated man. He had skills in engineering. He had skills in surveying, which is major. That's the ability to go out and measure and accurately record land and everything, map making, if you will, 101. And then, of course, he's going to get with himself. He's going to get a guy named William Clark, a former person who had worked with him during the American Revolution. He's a little bit younger than him, but they were friends. And he, too, is educated, a surveyor. He has lots of skills he's going to bring to it. He's going to be the co-leader. So you have Captain Meriwether Lewis Clark, Meriwether Lewis, and you have William Clark, the co-leader of this expedition. They're going to set out. They're going to travel across the Appalachian Mountains. They go across all the territories, across the Mississippi. They're going to eventually get to the city of St. Louis. St. Louis was a trading post, if you will. There was a fort there. There was a town there. Not in today's society, if you saw it, you wouldn't say, ooh, city. But definitely, it was the furthest outpost that America had westward. So he's going to get there. He's going to hire a bunch of guys to go with him, about 30 of them. They'll include sailors, gunsmith, carpenters, shipwrights, scouts, cooks, you name it, anybody and everybody that would be needed. Because, if you got a gun and it needs to be fixed, you got to have a gunsmith. If you got a boat and it needs to be fixed, you got to have a guy who can do that. You're going to need carpenters, and you're going to need, everybody's going to have to chip in and do stuff. So he's going to take people who know what they're doing with him. And of course, along the way, many of these people are going to learn each other's jobs, because what happens if the gunsmith gets killed and everybody's guns get messed up? Well, somebody's got to fix them. So this was also a learning opportunity for a lot of these guys on this trip, and it was going to be extremely dangerous going here. This was as unknown to them as when we went to the moon in the 1960s. So this was pretty interesting stuff. They'll travel up the Missouri River. Obviously, as we've talked before, traveling by boat is the easiest way to get around. Along the way, not too far into the expedition, they're going to come across an Indian village. There, they're going to hire, we call it hire, I think it's more bought, a young lady named Sacagawea. Sacagawea was a Shoshone woman who had been captured younger in her life and moved eastward. She had been traded for and so forth and so on. Her husband was one of the guides on the trip. He was a French / Indian, and of course, she is quite important to this. As being the one person who had been west, she had had contact with all these other tribes, and the fact that she spoke French, she spoke English, she spoke Shoshone, she spoke, all these different languages. She was a polyglot. That's a vocabulary word. If I could do this, I'd put it up in front of you, polyglot. If you're, bilingual, you speak 2 languages. If you're a polyglot, well, you speak at least 3 and probably more. So polyglot. One of the great things about her was that if she came across some Indians and she did not know their language, there was a good chance that those Indians knew another language that she did know. So through the art of translation, Lewis and Clark are going to be able to communicate with Indians that they come in contact with. One interesting thing, there was an accident with one of the boats that overturned, and she jumped in the water and swam and saved some of the most valuable papers. Lewis and Clark both kept a box full of empty journals that they were filling up very quickly as they went through their journey across the Louisiana territory, recording, plants, animals. They were looking for ores. Why ores, you say? Well, ores were probably the most important thing they were looking for. That's mining goods, especially iron, coal, tin, things like that. Obviously, gold and silver would be awesome, but really iron ore, coal, and tin are required to make things like steel and stuff like that. Now, we weren't in an industrial revolution, but Thomas Jefferson had been in France during the 1780s and was himself an amateur engineer, slight scientist, even a botanist a little bit. Very interested. He was, remember, an Enlightenment kind of guy, learned a lot of different things. And he recognized that, as England, of course, is entering her industrial revolution at this period of time, he had seen or heard about things like steam engines and stuff like that. France was entering an industrial revolution age as well. not as quickly as the English because of the war, but they too were investigating all sorts of new sciences and everything. And Thomas Jefferson recognized that maybe America's not in an industrial revolution now, but we will be. And to fuel that industrial revolution, we're going to need, those minerals and things like that that are out there. And of course, finding out whether they're out there was a big part of being able to sell America to America, sell Louisiana to us, that it was a good deal. So when Sacagawea jumped in and saved the records of all the stuff that they had been collecting and things like that, that was a huge thing. She also, at one point in time, they were in pretty desperate shape, and she had come across a tribe of Shoshone, and this was what you would call the southwestern half in the area of southwestern half of South Dakota, in that part of America, if you will. And lo and behold, who's the newest leader of that particular group that she came across? Her long lost brother. So that was a stroke of good luck for, she kind of, did all this. She was also a working mom. She did all this carrying a baby on her back. She was a tough lady. I mean, she walked, she hunted, she negotiated, she carried a baby on her back. She, really, this was a working mom. So, kudos to Sacagawea. She will eventually lead us across the Continental Divide, which is a pass between the Rocky Mountains, over the Rocky Mountains, into what is today Oregon. And we'll go down some rivers on the other side, which will eventually lead us to the Pacific Ocean. When we get there, we'll actually have mapped that far. Then we'll return and come back a little bit more of a southerly route. They went kind of across the top of the map towards California, but now they're going to come back and they're going to swoop down just a little bit. In the end, when they returned to St. Louis in 1807, they will have mapped out a pretty good chunk of America. It took them about a year and a half to get to the Atlantic Ocean and about a year to get back. So you're looking at 1806 in that area of when they finally got back. Good news, bad news. Good news is that the Lewis and Clark expedition was a success. They brought back hundreds and hundreds of specimens and descriptions of things that they had seen and the people they had met. Bad things, a lot of the people they met were not exactly friendly. Some of the Indians were not as friendly as we had hoped. But if they'd heard rumors about what, Europeaners in the East and what had happened to the Indians in the East, kind of understand why they were a little bit, we don't want you here. But, there was a lot of good things that they brought back with them. And, America was super uber excited to find out what was out there. That, however, left about a third of Louisiana not explored. If you look at St. Louis south, towards Texas, none of that had been, investigated. Lewis and Clark did not investigate that part. And a guy named Zebulon Pike is going to do that. While Lewis and Clark are traipsing across the northern part of Louisiana, he is going to traipse straight across. He's going to start his expedition in St. Louis as well, because that is still the furthest west America was, outpost. Instead of going northwards up the Missouri River like Lewis and Clark did, he's going to head straight across. And when he gets there, he's going to head over to the Colorado mountains down there, and eventually he's going to hit the Colorado Divide. And there he's going to name a giant peak. It'll be named after himself. He'll call it Pikes Peak. Still there today. Pikes Peak is still there today. And then he'll move southward down towards Mexico, following the ridgeline of the mountains into Mexico. And then he'll cut back across what is today Texas, and then right above New Orleans hit the Mississippi River, and then travel back up the Mississippi River to St. Louis.